Hi, myself Bhupati belongs to Department of Mechanical Engineering, Institution Law College of Engineering and Technology. So today's topic is ignition system. In IC engine, there is a n number of subsystems are used for running the IC engine in a um, performed in a good manner. So in that there are cooling system, lubrication system, ignition system, and fuel support system. So a lot of systems are available. So in that today's topic we're going to discuss about the ignition system. So ignition system are used in heat engine to initiate combustion by ignite the fuel air mixture. In a spark ignition version of the internal combustion engine, such as petrol engine, the ignition system creates a spark to ignite the fuel air mixture just before each combustion stroke. In gas turbine engines and rocket engines normally use an ignition system only during startup. So these are the introduction of ignition system. There are different types of ignition system. So battery coil ignition system, magneto ignition system, electronic ignition system, and distributor-less ignition system. So battery coils ignition system. So commonly used in a four-wheeler and modern two-wheelers. This system uses a 6-volt or 12-volt battery, an ignition coil, that's a transformer to set up voltage, a contact breaker, and a distributor to send spark to cylinders. Magneto ignition system used in kickstart engine like scooters and some motorcycles. This system uses a magneto generator to create, store, and supply electricity for the spark, eliminating the need for a battery. Electronic ignition system uses solid-state devices, transistors, sensors instead of breaker point to control the ignition coil, providing stronger spark, better performance, and lower maintenance. Distributor-less ignition system, a modern efficient system that eliminates the distributor. It uses multiple ignition coil, often one per cycle, directly supplying the spark plug. These are the different types of ignition system. In that, today we are going to cover the battery coil ignition system and magneto ignition system. So battery coil ignition system. Function of ignition system to produce spark at the end of compression stroke to ignite the fuel. To fire the air fuel mixture at a correct time by giving electrical power to the spark plug. Modern SI engines uses the battery or coil ignition system. Energy required for establishing the arc is obtained from 6-volt or 12-volt battery. This is the schematic arrangement of battery coil ignition system. Here there will be a, this is the battery. So the battery will be located here. Here this is the ignition switch, and here will be a cam. So based on the rotation of the cam, the contact breaker will be activated. This is the cam. This is the contact breaker point. So the contact breaker point will be activated based on the cam, and two windings, primary winding and secondary winding. Primary winding are thick wire and secondary winding are thin wire that will be connected to the distributor. So from this distributor, the voltage current will be distributed to each cylinder for making the spark. So this is the schematic arrangement of battery coil ignition system and construction. So it's here battery electrical power source provides a voltage provides a voltage of 6 or 12 volt. Ignition coil. Purpose of this ignition coil is to set up the battery voltage 6 or 12 volt to 20,000 or 30,000 volt required to produce spark for ignition in the spark plug. Then ignition switch. It acts as a locking switch. Whenever it is on position, the current will flow through the circuit. Contact breaker. It is the mechanical device for making and breaking the primary ignition circuit. Distributor. It distributes the high voltage to the respective spark plug at a regular interval in the current sequence. Condenser. It is connected across the contact breaker. It is used to avoid excess sparking at a contact breaker point and to induce a high voltage in the secondary circuit by causing more rapid contact break of the primary circuit. So spark plug, it is fitted on the cylinder head of the engine. So it, by the help of the spark plug, it ignite the spark during the combustion stroke. Then working principle. The system has two circuits, primary circuit and secondary circuit. So primary circuit covers the battery, primary coil, condenser and contact breaker. Secondary circuit covers the secondary coil, distributor and spark plug. When the primary circuit is closed by the contact breaker, the current begins to flow through the primary coil. EMF induced in the secondary coil is proportional to the rate at which magnetic flux increases due to the primary current flow. Then at the time, the EMF produced in the secondary coil is not sufficient to produce the spark plug. When the primary circuit is opened by the contact breaker, the magnetic field is entirely collapsed. At very high voltage in the range of 10,000 to 20,000 volt is induced in the secondary coil due to sudden collapse of the magnetic field in the coil. The high voltage is supplied through the high tension distribution to the corresponding spark plug, thereby producing a spark. So condenser in the circuit helps to achieve very rapid collapse of the magnetic field or inducing the very high voltage. Without a condenser, the magnetic field collapse could be slow, produce secondary voltage. This is the working of uh, battery coil ignition system, magneto ignition system. So magneto-ignition system, the main difference between coil and magneto-system is that battery is replaced by the rotating magnet. It consists of switch, magnet, condenser, contact breaker, distributor and spark plug. So as like a battery coil ignition system, here we are having a battery coil ignition system. So where we are using a battery, instead of the battery, here we are using a magnet for producing the EMF. The magneto consists of rotating magnet assembly and a fixed armature. The armature contains the primary winding and secondary winding. The magnetic is located on the outer rim of the wheel. So this is the schematic arrangement of battery coil ignition system. So this is the battery arrangement. So this is the battery arrangement. Then this is the fixed armature. Armature having the primary winding and the secondary winding. If the contact breaker is in joint, the circuit will be closed. So there will be a normal current will be flowing and it will be passed to earth. If the contact breaker is open, it will collapse the EMF and high voltage will be generated in the winding. That high voltage current is passed to distributor and it will produce the spark, sequence of spark in the cylinder. So this is the schematic arrangement of magneto ignition system. So working principle, engine is cranked by a switching on the ignition system. The engine rotates the magnetic assembly. As the magnet rotates, the EMF is induced in the primary circuit and the current flows through the contact breaker point. When the primary circuit is opened by the contact breaker, the magnetic field collapses. A very high voltage is induced in the secondary coil due to sudden collapse of magnetic field. So high voltage is supplied through the high tension distribution to the corresponding spark plug, thereby producing a spark. So condenser in the circuit helps achieve very rapid collapse of the magnetic field for inducing a very high voltage. Condenser also avoids sparking at the contact breaking points. So this is the working of battery coil and magneto coil ignition system. And next will be comparison of ignition systems. So comparison of both the battery coil and magneto coil ignition system. In battery coil ignition system, we are the source of energy is battery, but in the magneto coil ignition system, the source of energy is in electromagnet. And battery coil ignition system starting was easy, but in magneto coil ignition system is difficult to start. Sparking is good even at low speed. For poor sparking at low speed, then it is the battery is discharged, the engine cannot be started, and in a magneto coil it is difficult. So application of battery coil ignition system is used in cars, buses, in trucks. Magneto coil ignition system normally it is used in motorcycles and scooters. So overview of today's video is we discussed about the ignition system and the types of ignition system and working of battery coil and magneto ignition system, and finally we compare the working of both ignition system. Thank you. Thank you.